The Name 1, Part 3 of 4. But without the progress that this reference to the Greeks would have allowed him, right at the foundations, Gardner goes to Mill, closer to him. He highlights what it is about, in other words, what function is performed by the proper noun, that allows us straight away to distinguish, to locate it as such as a proper name. With a certain pertinence in his approach to the problem, Mill puts the accent on this. It is that in which a proper noun is distinguished from a common noun is in the realm of something that is at the level of meaning. The noun, common noun, seems to relate to the object, insofar as it is with it that it makes sense. If something is a proper name, it is insofar as it is not the meaning of the object that it brings with it, but something that is in the order of a mark, in some way applied to the object, superimposed on it, and that will be, from this fact, all the more tightly consolidated when it is less open, given the absence of meaning, to any participation in a dimension through which this object goes beyond itself, communes with other objects. Moreover, Mill includes here, to play the role of a little allegory linked to a tale, the bringing into play of an image of the fantasy. It's the story of the role of the fairy Morgiana, who wants to save some of those she protects from I don't know what evil fate to which they are destined, by the fact that a chalk mark has been put on their door in town. Morgiana averts their being struck down by this lethal fate by making the same mark on all the other houses in the same town. Here, Sir Gardner has no trouble showing the méconnaissance that this allegory itself indicates. It's that if Mill had had a more complete notion of the impact of the proper name, it is not only the mark's aspect of identification that he should have taken into account, through the forgery of it, it is also the distinctive aspect. And as such, the allegory would have been more appropriate if we said that the fairy Morgiana must have also marked the other houses with a chalk sign, but different to the first one, in such a way that the one who, coming into the town in order to fulfill his mission, looked for the house where he had to carry out his fatal deed, no longer knew how to find the right sign, precisely for lack of having known in advance which sign amongst the others he had to look for. This brings Gardner to an articulation which is this one. It's that, in clear reference to this distinction between the signifier and the signified, which is fundamental to any linguist, even if he does not as such promote it in his discourse, Gardner, not without grounds, remarks that it is not really about an absence of meaning in the usage of the proper name, for just about everything says the opposite. Very often proper names have a meaning, even Monsieur Durand, Mr. During, that has a meaning, Mr. Smith means blacksmith, and it is very clear that it is not because Mr. Blacksmith might by chance be a blacksmith that his name will be any the less a proper noun. What shows usage of the proper name, Mr. Gardner tells us, is that the emphasis, in the way it is employed, is not on the meaning but on the sound insofar as it is distinctive. This is manifestly a very big step in the right direction in terms of dimensions that will in most instances allow us practically to glimpse something that functions more specifically as a proper name. Nevertheless, it is all the same paradoxical to see precisely a linguist, for whom the first definition that he would give to the material he studies, phonemes, is that it is precisely the sounds that distinguish certain ones from others, to give as a particular distinctive trait to the function of the proper name, that it be precisely from the fact that the proper name is composed of distinctive sounds, that we can characterize it as a proper name. For of course, from a certain angle, it is clear that all usage of language is precisely founded on this. is that a language is made from a material that is made up of distinctive sounds. Of course, it's not that this objection does not occur in the workings out of the author himself. It is here that he inserts the notion of the subjective, in the psychological sense of the term, subjective attention accorded to the signifier as aural matter here. Make good note of what I am indicating here. It's that the linguist who, following a methodological principle, is forced to move away from, I'm not saying totally eliminate, his field, just like the mathematician, everything that is correctly speaking a psychological reference is all the same brought in here as such to take into account a psychological dimension as such. I mean, of the fact that the subject, he says, invests in, pays special attention to what is the body of his interest when it comes to the proper name. It's insofar as it conveys a certain aural difference that it is taken to be a proper name, underlining that, on the contrary, in everyday speech, for example what I am in the process of communicating to you now, I pay absolutely no attention to the aural matter of what I am telling you. If I were to pay too much attention to it, I would quickly end up finding my discourse fading away and drying up. Above all, I try to communicate something to you. It's because I think I know how to speak French that the matter, effectively distinctive at its base, comes to me. It is here as a vehicle to which I pay no attention. I think about the goal I am heading towards, which is to hand over to you certain aspects of thought that I am communicating to you. Is it as true as all that every time we pronounce a proper name, we are psychologically alerted to this emphasis put on the aural matter as such? This is not absolutely true. I do not think any more about the aural matter Sir Alan Gardner when I speak to you about it, than at the moment that I speak of the Wetzeln, to crumple, or whatever else. It is certain that, whatever the value of the claim made by the linguist here, it breaks down very specifically insofar as it thinks it only has value by referring to the psychological dimension. And on what point does it break down? Precisely in articulating something that is perhaps the very function of the subject, but the subject defined in a completely different way from anything of the order of concrete psychology, of the subject insofar as we could, as we must, as we do, correctly speaking, define it in its reference to the signifier. There is a subject that cannot be confused with the signifier as such, but that is deployed within this reference to the signifier with traits, characteristics that can be perfectly articulated and formalized, and that must allow us to grasp, to discern as such the idiomatic character. If I take up the Greek reference, it's because it keeps me away from confusing it with the use of the word particular in the Russellian definition, the idiomatic character as such of the proper name. Let's try now to indicate in what sense I expect you to grasp hold of it. In this sense in which, for a long time, I have been bringing in, at the level of the definition of the unconscious, the function of the letter. This function of the letter, I brought it in for you to start with in a poetic kind of way. The seminar on the purloined letter, in our very first years of theoretical elaboration, was absolutely there in order to indicate something to you, to take the term letter in a literal way, since it concerns an actual missive, that it was something that we could consider as determining, precisely in the psychical structure of the subject. A fable, no doubt, but one that, in its fictional structure, brings us back to the most profound truth. When I spoke of the agency of the letter in the unconscious a few years later, I put in there, by including metaphor and metonymy, a much more precise tone. We have got to the point now, with this point of departure of the function of the unary mark, to something that will allow us to go further. I propose that there can be a definition of the proper name to the extent that we glimpse the nominating relationship with something that, in its radical nature, is of the order of the letter. You are going to say to me, but there is a big problem. For there are plenty of people who do not know how to read and who still use proper names, and on top of that, proper names have existed with the form of identification they determine before the appearance of writing. It is in relation to this, in this register, that a very good book came out, L'homme avant l'écriture, Man before writing, which gives us the latest account of what is actually known about human evolution prior to any historical record. Yet, how can we define ethnography, which certain theorists have believed to be plausible to advance, concerning everything that is correctly speaking of the order of culture and tradition, as expanded on outside of any possibility of documentation by use of the tool of writing? Is it as true as all that? There is a book to which I would like to ask all those who are interested to refer to, and some of you have already preempted my recommendation. It is the book by James Fevrier on the history of writing. If you have time during the holidays, I beg you to have a look at it. You will see there something expanded on with evidence, which I am indicating to you as a general springboard, because it is not in some way disengaged and it is present everywhere. It's that, prehistorically speaking, if I may express myself in this way, I mean, to the very extent that the stratigraphic stages of what we find attest to technological and material evolution of human artifacts, prehistorically, all that we can see of what happens with the arrival of writing, and hence in the relationship between writing and language, everything happens in the following way, of which here is very precisely the proposed result, articulated in front of us. Everything happens in the following way. Without any doubt, we can accept that man, since he has been man, has emitted vocalizations as speech. On the other hand, there is something of the order of strokes, about which I have told you the feeling of admiration that I have had at finding them marked in little rows on the side of some antelope. In prehistorical material there is an endless number of manifestations of this, of traces that have no other feature than of being, as this stroke, signifiers and nothing more.